Hey guys, it's Dean. Welcome to the Better Man podcast. Today's episode is a solo episode. So I mentioned in a couple episodes ago that we would be doing more, or that I would be doing more solo episodes moving forward. And these would be focused on a lot of the questions that I tend to get with Manful Yoga in general. Obviously, the Better Man podcast is separate from Manful Yoga. It is an extension in a way. I think that Manful Yoga, well, I don't think that, but Manful Yoga is mostly physical fitness focused. I think there's a lot to learn in there in terms of mental well-being. There's obviously a lot of non-physical benefits that come from practicing Manful Yoga that we've heard a ton from our members. But the Better Man podcast is kind of part of the idea of Manful Yoga. I think that part of why I'm so interested in fitness is because it helps you become better. It's just part of what goes into being healthy. It helps you sharpen the saw, so to speak, in terms of just making you more capable, in terms of helping you with your productivity, in terms of helping you be healthier, of teaching you things that translate into the real world. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of make that connection between Manful Yoga and the Better Man podcast before I move on, because I don't want this podcast to just be me talking about whatever I want. I want there to be an idea behind it. And so I just wanted to establish that really quick. All right. So this podcast is going to focus on my story with how I got started with yoga. I'm going to talk about how Manful Yoga evolved from there, and kind of what Manful Yoga does now in terms of what we specifically do to make it more helpful for guys, and also how we've made it kind of an alternative to mainstream yoga in terms of the non-inclusion of spirituality. And I'll get into all of that. And it kind of came up because we're launching a new ad basically this week. And whenever we launch new ads to an audience that isn't already familiar with Manful Yoga, we get, those people who I'll call them yoga trolls, because that's what they are. But we get the people who just don't agree with the way that, with what we're doing with Manful Yoga. They don't like that it's made for men. They don't like that it's not spiritual. So it always brings up, the idea of, why does Manful Yoga exist to begin with? And why do I believe in it? And how is it helping tens of thousands of men? So we're going to get into that in a second. But first off, I do want to start by just replying to the emails and the feedback that I had from my last solo podcast episode about getting back on track. I heard from a ton of people who are going through currently, or have gone through that same process or that same feeling of just not being where they want to be, not feeling like they have the typical focus, or just feeling great, feeling as good as they want to. People who have had difficulty getting back to where they were, reestablishing habits that they know work for them. And I'm really glad that I could let you guys know about my experience with that, because hopefully it made you feel like you weren't going through that alone. And I also want to point out something that I think is important, which is I didn't feel badly sharing. I didn't feel bad sharing that with you. I didn't feel shame around it. I didn't think that something was wrong in the sense that it was never going to get better. I knew that this was just part of the process of getting back at things, that, you're not always going to be at your best. You're going to have periods where you're just not feeling great, where you're not as productive as you normally are. And so, I want to kind of explain my process behind that. And I am really feeling, I will say that, compared to where I was, so to speak, a couple months ago, back in July after I had COVID, I am in a much better place. And I shared a lot of that process with you in my previous solo episode. So listen to that if you want to check back in with that. But one big part of that was just having faith that I would make it back, and having faith, not in any sort of organized religious sense, but just having faith because I knew I would get back to it because other people have gone through the same thing, and that I'm not special, and that if I'm going through it, then there are probably millions of other people who have gone through the same thing. So if you want to learn more about that concept, by the way, I found The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson to be a really powerful way to kind of understanding that mentality and helping it anyway, applying it in a way that was helpful. So, and the other thing that surprised people from that podcast was that I have back pain. So yeah, while admittedly this is a bit embarrassing for somebody who has designed some really effective programs for relieving back pain, and that's a big reason why I do manful yoga myself. This is just something that happens regularly when you work out. You're gonna have little, you're gonna have little tweaks now and then that make it difficult to exercise. So I will be actually explaining this full process, how to kind of deal with exercise while you're injured, and some mindsets that you should embrace. Because all of us are going to go through it, and I think that there's a good way to get through injury, and I think there's a bad way to do it, which is just feeling bad for yourself and not doing anything and just lamenting what you can't do. And there's a better way to do that that's going to help you feel better, but also help you recover more quickly too. So I'm going to be covering that in my next solo podcast, so be on the lookout for that. If you are looking for an immediate guide on that, I do have something in the Manful Yoga app and members area, which talks about how to approach working out while you're injured. So you can check that out in the Manful Yoga app and members area. If you're not already a member, you can get a free 7-day trial at manfulyoga.com/join. All right, so let's get into this episode. Why does Manful Yoga exist? So again, we just launched some new ads for our Strength Foundations Challenge. And whenever we launch, a new ad and we talk to Manful Yoga, we talk about Manful Yoga to an audience that isn't already familiar with Manful Yoga. We get a lot of people coming out who strongly disagree with what we're doing, mainly because it just doesn't fit their ideal of what yoga is. And I totally understand where they're coming from. I get it. Like, Manful Yoga is not typical yoga, but I don't think there has to be a either or. One can not exist while the other survives situation. No, I'm not forcing anybody to do Manful Yoga, and by me doing Manful Yoga, it doesn't make your yoga practice any different. It's just we're doing things differently, and we're getting what we want out of it. So anyways, so that all brings up why Manful Yoga started in the first place. So, that kind of starts with my story of how I got into yoga. If you haven't heard this yet. So basically in 2011, I was a collegiate lacrosse player. So, I was doing a lot of the typical workouts that an athlete would do, lifting weights, doing conditioning drills, lots of sprinting, jumping, footwork. I was obviously practicing lacrosse, doing shooting drills, all that stuff. And I wandered into a yoga studio during that period. I was home for winter break. And I wandered into a yoga studio, literally stumbled into a yoga studio while I was looking for the tailor. I was trying to get my pants fixed. And I stumbled into a yoga studio, and I was actually on my way to the gym after that. So my plan was to drop off the pants and then go to the gym. And I was in the yoga studio, and they were about to start a class, I think in the next 15 minutes. And I had always wanted to do yoga. There was something about it that intrigued me. I actually vividly remember being in one of my friends' apartments in college. And I was saying, you know what, I'd really like to try yoga sometime. And so I was there at the yoga studio, and I was like, let me try this. And I asked them, would this help me as an athlete? And they said, oh yeah, it's definitely going to help your core strength. It's going to help your balance. It's going to help your flexibility. And I said, okay, whatever. Let me give this a shot. And then they also said, you don't have to wear a shirt. And I was like, oh, so cool. So anyways, I was there, and I was going to give it a shot. And quite honestly, I wasn't, I think the reason, I don't know if I would have gone to a yoga studio on purpose back then. Yoga, in 2011, just culturally where we were with how we perceived yoga was a lot different than what it is now, 11 years later. So, I don't think I would have wanted to have gone to a yoga studio just because it was not something that was cool back then. I don't know if it's cool or not now. I think it's cool, but back then it was just not something that I wanted to do. I actually remember my friend inviting me to go to yoga once, maybe a few months before that, and I was like, no way, dude, I'm not going to yoga. So anyways, I was in the class, and it's super hot. I did this was Bikram yoga, or hot yoga as it's called. And halfway through that class, I thought that I was on punked. That was and still is the hardest workout that I've ever done. And halfway through that class, I'm standing there drenched in my own sweat. There's, the towel beneath me is just like, I don't even know if I had a towel, but there's a puddle of sweat beneath me. I've been pushing myself super hard, and I'm only halfway through the workout. I was totally drained. And it was in that moment that I realized, wow, I am not as strong as I thought I was. So there were just so many different movements that were part of that yoga workout, part of that series, that exposed all these weaknesses that I didn't know about. So something that I hadn't done at all in my other workouts was isometric strengthening, holding poses for an extended period of time. We also didn't do any balancing or static balancing postures where you're standing on one foot and just holding it. There also wasn't a lot of focus on flexibility. The emphasis was on strength and speed and endurance in my other workouts. And this workout was focused on you going deeper into a pose. So there were just so many aspects of my fitness that I wasn't covering with my other, more traditional workouts. And that just made me realize, wow, I have got a lot to learn from this yoga workout. So I started going to yoga. I think I went 6 times per week. Doing Bikram yoga classes two days in a row was tough, or multiple days in a row was really tough. And then I kind of branched out and I found Vinyasa yoga, it means flow. But Vinyasa or power yoga really strongly depends on the instructor. You could get anything from a Vinyasa or a power yoga class. Some of them might be more focused on breathing and stretching. Some of them might be more strength focused. So it's really a mixed bag, and it depends on the studio and the instructor when you're doing Vinyasa yoga. But then I started to learn other poses, and I just kind of immersed myself in that yoga world. And I was doing 6, sometimes even 7 sessions per week. And I took advantage of a lot of the free week yoga classes. Most yoga studios will give you a free week where you get to go try stuff out. Or it's an introductory offer of some sort, like $30 for the week instead of, $25 for a class or something like that. So anyways, I tried out a lot of different yoga, and I was exposing myself to these different movements, and I was learning new exercises, and it was great because I was working on strength in new ways. I was working on my flexibility for the first time, challenging my balance in different ways, learning more about, so anyways, I was doing a lot of different movements, but during those workouts, there wasn't much emphasis on technique. So, I was looking around like everybody else when they go to a yoga class. For the most part, you're looking around at what other people are doing. You're kind of just mirroring what other people are doing. You're not really, at least in my experience, there's not enough instruction to really understand what you're supposed to be doing in each pose. And that's not the fault of the yoga instructor or the yoga studio, because number one, if you're a yoga instructor in a studio, it's tough to go around, and if you've got like 30 people in the class, it's really tough to go around and make adjustments to everybody. But secondly, yoga, as it is at a studio, mostly is not meant to be just fitness. Yoga is an experience when you're at a yoga studio. So they're providing an experience. There's the community element there. There's also, the the room, the environment creates part of that. So it's not purely a physical fitness thing. So my experience with that left me wanting more focus on the pose technique because I was doing the poses, but I just didn't know how I was supposed to be doing them. I didn't know where my knee should be. I didn't know where I should be feeling the stretches. I also didn't know how to modify the poses because I was I was a pretty muscly 21-year-old when I started doing yoga. Lots of strength work, not a lot of flexibility work. So I wasn't as flexible as the other people in there. Not to mention that I'm a guy and men are less flexible than women. So I wasn't getting the focus on technique that I wanted. The I also wasn't learning what the benefits of the poses were. I kind of wanted to know, like, what is this doing for my fitness? I wanted some explanation. I wanted to learn. And there was also, as you're doing these stretches, as you're doing the poses, there's also the introduction of some spirituality or some kind of spiritual guidance as you're doing it. And I can understand. I mean, that's what yoga is. Most yoga does include that some talk of that. It depends on the class. It depends on the instructor. Sometimes you'll get chanting at the beginning. Sometimes you'll get the instructor will feel inspired to give you some spiritual guidance like midway through the session. Maybe they'll do some chanting on their own. So anyways, there was that too. And for me, there's nothing. I mean, if that's what you want out of yoga class, that's great. But for me, I was there because I really wanted to improve my fitness. I wanted to get stronger as an athlete. I wanted to work on my flexibility, work on my strength in new ways, so that I was improving my performance and also minimizing my risk of injury. So for me, the spiritual aspects of it, that just wasn't what I wanted to get out of the workouts. So when I started looking for, so anyways, that prompted me to kind of start looking for other types of yoga. I was trying to find more physical fitness focused yoga, or maybe yoga that was more made for men. Kind of at the time, I just made the assumption that most men wanted to work out and do yoga because they wanted the fitness benefits from it. And they wanted a non-spiritual experience. They wanted a really good workout. Not to say that that's not what all men want, or that's even what most men want from yoga, but that was my assumption at the time. Keep in mind, I'm a 21-year-old college dude who plays lacrosse. Okay. So I made a lot of assumptions, or not made a lot of assumptions, but that was kind of my assumption at the time, that most men wanted the workout out of yoga. So I was looking for kind of a more male focused, maybe athlete focused, physical fitness focused type of yoga, and there wasn't really anything. I couldn't find anything, honestly. So I decided that I was going to start teaching my lacrosse team yoga. So I actually started recording workouts, and I needed somewhere to put those workouts because I wanted them to be able to do them on their own. I was the conditioning coach for my lacrosse team at the time, and I wanted somewhere to put those workouts so they could easily watch them. And there was this thing called YouTube back then. It actually only had a 10-minute limit on the videos at the time, so you had to upload in chunks rather than uploading the full video. Now you can do 10,000 minutes or 10,000 hours. I can't remember how long. Anyways, so I recorded workouts. Terrible lighting, terrible instruction. I barely knew what I was doing, but I recorded workouts and I uploaded them to YouTube. And I had to come up with a name for them. So I initially tried Bro Flow Yoga because I just thought that was a really funny name. And then I got a really nice cease and desist letter from another yoga company. They're like, well, this is too similar to ours. So would you be able to change it? And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I changed it to Man Flow Yoga. And that's what it's been. So I started adding YouTube videos to this channel called Man Flow Yoga. And the original goal there, again, I wanted my lacrosse teammates to be able to do workouts over winter break. But I also wanted to kind of make a statement to men that, hey, I am what what the typical, I won't say that. How do I phrase this? I am kind of, I kind of look like what the guy who is working out is striving towards. I'm, that's what I looked like. That's the reality of it. I'm an athlete. I looked like an athlete because I was an athlete. And so here's a guy who's in good shape, who's working out, and he's using yoga to help make himself stronger. So I kind of wanted to just put that image out to the world and say, hey, guys, yoga is really good for you. It can help you get better at your other workouts. It can help you improve your performance. It's also going to help you with just feeling better in general because you're actually focusing on flexibility and stretching and recovery. And so I wanted to put that out because it had really helped me. And I wanted other guys to be able to experience that. And so that was kind of the goal with Manful Yoga. I wanted to put that image out and trying to make yoga more acceptable for guys. And so I started putting out videos. And, if you actually go back and look at some of my earlier yoga videos, like early yoga videos, you'll kind of see that they're much different from what they are now. They were kind of much more of a traditional yoga. I think I used some of the Sanskrit names when I was doing that. When I was making those videos, I think they might have flowed a little bit faster. There wasn't as much emphasis on technique. So, they were kind of more similar to what you would see in a typical yoga studio. And then as I kind of became more serious with what I was doing with Manful Yoga, I graduated college. I got a different job. I got a job in just a third party logistics sales company. I was just basically sitting in an office and making cold calls all day. By the way, if you're curious about what I studied in college, it was not business. I triple majored. I had a Middle Eastern studies, languages and cultures of Asia, and history. And admittedly, those disciplines intermingled with one another. It wasn't like I was taking 3 times the classes. But I had worked at the U.S. Embassy in Turkey the year before that. I had actually had multiple trips to Turkey. I was fluent in Turkish. I got what's called a critical language scholarship to study abroad in Turkey in the summer of 2010, and then I went back and studied as an exchange student at Boğaziçi University. So that was my kind of goal, was to work with the U.S. government somehow. And I had even before then, actually, in college, I had initially accepted a 4-year scholarship with the Army ROTC program, and I got through my first year of that, and I wasn't feeling it. I was like, I don't think this is for me. I'm just a little more self-directed. So, anyways, that was my background in college, and so I couldn't find a job in what I studied. I took this other job. And I really didn't like it. I hated it, actually. And after about 6 months of doing that job, I came to a point where I accepted another job. So I quit the job that I didn't like to accept that other job, and then that other job offer fell through. So I was in a position where, okay, well, I don't have a job right now. I don't have any prospects for a job that I like. But what I do have is this YouTube channel and a Facebook page. So maybe I can do something with that. And so I started advertising webcam training with Manful Yoga. And that was when I first learned that I wasn't going to be training a bunch of other 21, 22-year-olds who wanted to get jacked with yoga. Because that's initially kind of that was the message that I was initially putting out. I was like, if you want to get jacked, then try Manful Yoga. Which looking back now, I can understand why that wouldn't be the most accepted message. Just in terms of, yoga on its own is not the best way to get jacked. I think you should be doing weight training and yoga. But also, like, who's doing yoga to get jacked, but anyways, so where was I? I'm losing myself. So I realized at that time, and then I started working with people, that I was going to be working with guys who were in their 50s. Those were the people who were reaching out to me. It wasn't guys in their 20s, and then I started to learn more about their experiences with yoga, and they had a similar experience to me in the sense that they weren't as flexible, so they had trouble mirroring the poses. They also didn't want the spiritual aspect out of the workout. Nothing wrong with it. They just didn't want it. They didn't want to do it. And then there was also this there was also kind of this sense of people who weren't ready to do a more intense form of fitness. So they were looking for something that was lower impact, maybe more gentle on the body, something that would help prepare them to do other workouts. And so that's what Manful Yoga evolved into. It evolved as a type of yoga that was better suited toward men's lower levels of flexibility. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because it's not just gender related. There's lifestyle. There's lifestyle that goes into that. It also evolved as a non-spiritual form of yoga, or, we can even just call it, to avoid having any sort of debate here, we could just call it a form of fitness. If we don't call it yoga, then fine. It's called Manful Yoga. That's what it is. The name's not changing. But I can understand why you would say that Manful Yoga is not yoga. And I would also agree with you there. Manful Yoga is not yoga. And I'll get into that more. And then also what men weren't, I talked about that, but what men weren't getting from yoga and what they were looking for. So anyways, let's talk about the first portion, which is Manful Yoga being designed for men. So the first part of that was making sure that there were poses and modifications that fit the average guy's flexibility. And also keep in mind, most people who are doing Manful Yoga, the younger ones are in their 40s. Most guys doing Manful Yoga are in their 50s and 60s. And then there's also guys in their 70s and even 80s doing Manful Yoga. So there's limited flexibility just due to biological gender. Men are just not as flexible as women. Men did not evolve to give birth, so joints are different, and just overall flexibility levels are different. The other component of that is there's sedentary lifestyles to consider. So, yoga, many of the original poses of yoga came about thousands of years ago. And most of them were focused on being able to sit in a seated meditation, right? Being able to sit in that lotus or cross-legged position with one leg stacked on the other. So a lot of those poses were geared toward preparing the body to be able to do that for extended periods of time. And then there were also many introductions of poses later on through the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century, when you started getting into tantric yoga. And then in the 19th century, there was actually a lot of influence from British gymnastics into what we now consider as general yoga. So the sun salutation wasn't invented until the 19th century. There's this idea that there's a yogi on a mountaintop doing a sun salutation in, first century, or even before the first century. And that's just not, the sun salutation didn't exist. So a lot of what, people understand as yoga, as historical yoga, didn't actually come about until the 19th century or the 20th century. And it's a combination of Indian martial arts, of physical fitness training, of British gymnastics, and of early traditional yoga. So the point of me saying that is that many of these postures required a different level of flexibility. And because we live in an age where most of us are sitting down at a desk, or many of us are sitting down at a desk. If we're not at a desk, we're sitting in a chair, we're driving somewhere. We're just not moving as much as we used to, which means that we don't have as much flexibility. And so there needs to be different poses, different modifications of those poses, so that if you do have limited flexibility, you can still do these poses in a way that works for your body and not get hurt. So that's the big consideration, is that men are just not as flexible. And there's also the biological differences to consider. So men and women have different centers in gravity. Men tend to use their upper body more. Women tend to use the hips and core more. And this also leads to men and women practicing differently. So doing yoga poses differently. So men tend to make different mistakes than women. You take a good example of this is boat pose. If you ask your typical female to do a boat pose and you ask your typical guy to do a boat pose, you're going to see some pretty dramatic differences, even if they're in really good shape. So the reality is that just most men now are less flexible, and they need different poses and modifications of those poses to help them. The second big component of manful yoga is the non-spiritual aspect. And I don't want to get into too much of a debate here, because I understand if you're looking at a traditional definition of yoga that you can't say that yoga is non-spiritual. Most yoga is spiritual. Manful yoga is not spiritual. It is what it is. It's fitness that's inspired by yoga, but it also includes bodyweight exercise and physical therapy influences to make it as effective as a workout as it can be. And the other thing to consider is that yoga has become much more popular in the last couple of decades. And because of that, there is actually a secondary definition of yoga that probably didn't exist 100 years ago. And if you can look it up, look at Merriam-Webster, look at a dictionary, and you'll see that the secondary definition of yoga says a system of physical postures, breathing techniques, and sometimes meditation derived from yoga, but often practiced independently, especially in Western cultures, to promote physical and emotional well-being. So there is a secondary definition of yoga. If the question becomes, is manful yoga or not, it doesn't really matter what the answer is. Manful yoga is what it is. Manful yoga is not spiritual. So that is one of the big components of it. And that's not to say that we don't find that we're neglecting spirituality entirely. A lot of people who do manful yoga are religious, and they practice their spirituality in other ways. And personally, for me, I don't follow a particular discipline, but I have a spiritual practice in the sense that I am trying to make sense of my place in the world. That I do believe in something, and that I understand and can kind of feel this sense of universal oneness that is, what a lot of religion is focused on. But the point is, I don't do that in my manful yoga workouts. I focus on the fitness aspects. So, which is kind of to bring up the point that most yoga isn't meant to be purely physical fitness. There's a big difference between a typical yoga class and manful yoga. And I don't think I need to go into too much detail, but again, the reality is that manful yoga is focused on fitness, and that's what we focus on. The cool thing about that is that there are a lot of non-physical benefits that come with manful yoga that just happen as a result of the way that it's done. So when you are focused on your breathing, when you're focused on your body, when you're pushing yourself, when you're immersing yourself in the workout, there are a lot of non-physical benefits that come from it. We actually have, tons of people when we ask our members about, hey, like, what are you getting out of these workouts? How's it helping you? One thing that we hear regularly is that, yeah, my whole day is different depending on whether or not I do manful yoga in the morning. Just because of, again, the way that those workouts are, what they do for you in terms of focusing on your body, focusing on your fitness, focusing on your breathing, forcing you to be in the present, to actually practice being in the present, not talking about being in the present, but actually being in the present, because you're focused on your body, focused on your breathing, focused on just those movements and those little nuances of what happens if I change my knee here. Okay, let me press down through my foot. Let me be aware of what my neck is doing. Because of all those things that go into it, there are also a tremendous amount of non-physical benefits or non-fitness or performance benefit that come from it. When you're doing, we've had a really cool, somebody actually posted about this last week on our Facebook group. But after we just launched a new challenge called the Breath Series 28-Day Challenge. But after doing this breath series for multiple weeks, I think for 2.5 weeks or so, their overall, their resting heart rate had dropped by 10%. And in addition to that, they were also taking 2 fewer breaths per minute. So and when you do that, there's a whole host of benefits that come from that. There's less stress on your body. You're going to sleep better. You're going to have better focus. You're going to have less anxiety. There are all these things that come from that. So again, the cool thing is that it's not just physical performance. There are also a lot of non-physical performance benefits that just come from the way that you're doing it. So and that's why that's what makes Manful Yoga different. And that's why Manful Yoga exists. And this has been, proven to help tens of thousands of guys and maybe even more, if you're counting, all of the DVDs that I've sold through my Body by Yoga programs on Amazon. If you're looking at I think we've sold over 40 or 50,000 copies of my book, Yoga Fitness for Men. Yoga for Athletes came out last year, and that's also very popular. And then if you look at the YouTube channel and the Facebook page, Facebook has over 100,000 likes. The YouTube channel has over 360,000 subscribers. So, if you're looking across all of those and considering all the people who have consumed that content, then this is something that's helped tens of thousands of guys. And I get emails and messages and reviews all the time that say, I'm so glad that Manful Yoga exists because I couldn't find the type of yoga that worked for me. They either wanted a non-spiritual form of yoga, or they wanted a yoga that would better fit their body as a typical inflexible guy. Sometimes it's both of those. Usually it's both of those at once. So, this is something that's really helping a lot of men all over. And I'm truly grateful that, this is something that I do on a day in and day out. That's, not only allows me to live kind of the lifestyle that I want to live, but it allows me to spend my day helping other people with something that I'm really passionate about. This is something that I would be doing. I would still be working out like this and still, I'd still be working out with this, still practicing yoga like this, whether or not this was my job. But, it's just a kind of a bonus that I get to do it and help other people experience the same benefits that I experienced when I was first starting yoga. And even now, I continually learn about my body and learn how to improve things. So anyways, I don't need to go into that too much, I don't think. But the bottom line here is that, there are some reasons that make Manful Yoga unique for what it is. Whether or not it's called yoga, I don't think it matters. It is what it is. And what we're doing is really helping people. And I'm really proud of that. And, again, some people disagree with it. I understand why they disagree. Whenever you see something that threatens your understanding of something or your worldview, then it's natural to attack it. But, on the other hand, I'm not forcing anybody to do Manful Yoga. I'm also not trying to dramatically change I'm not trying to change what yoga means. Manful Yoga is different from yoga. I'm just trying to provide an alternative. Hey, if you don't like the way that typical yoga is, you can try Manful Yoga instead, because it's what works for a lot of guys. It's kind of what works for me. So, be on the lookout. We're going to be doing more of these solo podcasts in the future. Again, in the beginning of this episode, I talked about our next episode, my next solo episode, which is going to be 2 weeks from now. And I'm going to be talking about injuries and how to approach fitness while you're injured, how to work around injuries, how you can have a better mindset. And then next week, we're going to be having a guest come out. So the plan, at least right now, is to release a solo episode every other week and do an interview with a guest every other week as well. So we are into season 2 of the Better Man podcast. I'd highly recommend you go back and check out some of the previous ones if you haven't already. And if you haven't already left a review on the Better Man podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcast, on Spotify. I think you can do it on Google too, wherever you listen to a podcast. And if this is really helping you, or if you just want to give me some feedback, you can email me at dean@manfulyoga.com, or talk about it in our, if you're a member, you can talk about it in our Facebook group, the Manful Yoga Community on Facebook, which is our members only group. And I'm excited to be able to do this. I'm also excited that I'm feeling better again and feeling, able to do this, because I definitely was not feeling up to doing this 2 months ago. And I'm excited to talk about things that I know you guys are interested in. So that's pretty much it for this episode. Guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. I hope this inspires you to be a better man. I hope this inspires you to keep doing manful yoga if you're already doing it. And if you're not already, you can always get started with a free 7-day trial at manfulyoga.com/join. Thanks for watching. And I hope to see you, or hear you, listen to you, be listened to on the next episode of the Better Man podcast. Bye, guys.
If you like that episode, check out this other one right here. I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you haven't subscribed, click this subscribe button over here, and you can listen to the full episodes on any major podcasting platform. Full details below in the description.